Jonny Gould, the broadcaster, is with us to talk about this and a few other bits and pieces as well. It's interesting, Jonny, and welcome, by the way.
Oh, it's nice to be here.
Good to see you. We spoke at some point during the pandemic, or towards the end of the pandemic. I remember speaking to a French journalist, I think it was, knowing that all this was going on. You know, number 10 are falling apart. Boris Johnson isn't making the right decisions. And I said, you know, in France, are people blaming Mr. Macron for the pandemic? And she looked at me as if it was the most stupid question. And she said, why would they do that? She couldn't fathom why anybody would think that a leader of the country was responsible for what happens with the ultimate fate of some people who succumb to the pandemic. I took her point, and I've heard other people say that, you know, this misses the point by simply pointing fingers, as it were.
Yeah, the buck stops with the Prime Minister in this culture, and it's our media social, which is rather different to that of France's, isn't it?
I think it is.
And indeed, our media, which was really against Boris, I think, before the advent of TalkTV, really. I think certainly the left-leaning media was really having a proper go at him, and then eventually got him for this. Boris must be absolutely kicking himself for the way that he conducted his premiership, because before the pandemic, I think he was a little bit lazy. You know, he could have had an agenda which moved things. And I think the fact that he stood down when Michael Gove stabbed him in the front. He would have had a better run at it back then. He won by 80 seats. He did all the great stuff. And then when he got into power, the pandemic hit him and he didn't really know what to do.
I mean, it's funny, we forget that it was just 12 weeks after he was there. And he came in with this, you know, stonking 80-seat majority, exactly how they told him at Eton it would happen. And it did. And there he was, so probably high on the crest of a wave. And then suddenly there's a pandemic, just, you know, under 3 months from him being in office. And, you know, maybe at the beginning he was complacent because he thought, wow, you know, I can do anything. I'm here not just for one term, I'm here for 2 terms. But once this came along, it was time really for some big boy thinking. And the accusation is that he took his finger off the button, as it were.
Yes, it was a complete U-turn. And I think he left some of the kind of detail, which he's not a detail man, is he? He left that to Dominic Cummings. That relationship fell apart very quickly. And then suddenly he was in the gifts of Van Tam and Whitty. And they took control while he was writing his memoirs in, various other things. He really wasn't quite on it. And I think for people who really slept well at night when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, and if you imagine what might have been in this country in 2019, that 80-seat majority was for a reason, apart from him winning through the Red Wall in a Thatcher kind of Dagenham way. Not just that, but also who he beat and how he beat him. And then this. I think it's a sad era for British politics.
You couldn't have written this, could you? You know, before it happened, that this would be how an 80-seat majority would kind of pan out. But I think back to the point of COVID. What's interesting is he began his evidence by apologising. I'm sorry to all those who lost loved ones. And I don't know whether that was a kind of general apology. We're all sorry to anybody who lost loved ones, or whether he was saying it was my fault that this happened. Because I don't, you know, you could construct a reasonable argument to say, well, if he hadn't locked down as he did, more people would have died. The other side of that is if he'd locked down sooner, fewer people would have done. You know, that you can keep having this argument. Nobody will ever really know which one is true. Supposedly the whole lockdown thing was actually about keeping the NHS free to treat COVID patients. So if he had locked down earlier, would that have meant that other patients who were looking for, I don't know, you know, heart, cancer, scans, that sort of thing, would they have suffered as a result of it?
Indeed, and the unassociated costs, you know, the terrible social costs, children abused.
To the lot.
I mean, just terrible, terrible things that happen. I think that he misjudged a lot of things. And, I mean, again, it was such a macro situation. Was that the Nightingale Hospital was never really filled.
No.
And the stats that we produced were veered towards encouraging bigger numbers than there actually were. And policy was made based upon those numbers, which put political pressure upon him. And then Sue Gray came along and it was full time.
Yeah, and we all know where she went to.
Indeed.
Yes,
indeed.
That's rather interesting.
Yes.
Let's move to the other big story as well that we've just been following, and that is Suella Braverman, former Home Secretary, giving her common statement, not only talking about the reason why she resigned. Spoiler alert, she didn't resign, she was fired. But nonetheless, whatever you think of Suella Braverman, she was entitled to give that speech, and her criticism really of Rishi Sunak's immigration policy. But she did caveat that by saying, look, if you can put it right, if you can get all these things right, you will have my full support.
To paraphrase David Steele all those years ago, I think she's going back to her constituency and preparing for opposition.
Yes.
I think that's what her and the right of the party are going to do, and who knows who's going to be part of that coalition. Maybe Boris Johnson will find his way back. Maybe Nigel Farage will come out the jungle and rejoin the Conservative Party. But yes, this was her fire and brimstone last opportunity, wasn't it, to be the star on the front stroke backbench before she makes her comeback, and she will. She's a very identifiable member of the Conservative Party, particularly if, and it is a big if they lose the next general election.
Well, she says that she warns the Tories they face electoral oblivion if they don't sort out the Rwanda scheme.
Yes. And that's a very interesting one. And I think they're fighting for their political lives here, James Cleverly and Rishi Sunak. And it's a kind of real battle since the Boris Johnson era of who actually runs the country. We're seeing this all over the West, aren't we, between the legislature and the parliamentarians. Who runs the country, the lawyers or the politicians? The proroguing, etc., and we've seen it with judicial reform in Israel. We saw it in Poland and Hungary. And indeed, the Supreme Court in the United States, where it's been a perennial problem that's the kind of tension of their triumvirate system, isn't it? But I think this is a determination for the power to return to Westminster. And this is all about Tony Blair, isn't it, who emasculated the House of Lords by taking it out of being the highest court in the land to being the Supreme Court. So this is kind of where this tension has started.
Indeed. And I can't work out what I think of Suella Braverman. I was with her when she was talking about those marches, which, I keep saying this, I'll keep saying it. These were anti-Israel marches. People don't like that phrase. They were. And she identified that. And I think that was good that somebody spotted that. But simultaneously, a lot of crime, forget that issue or COVID or Rwanda. Crime has gone up. We've seen horrendous crime. She's been the Home Secretary for over a year. Now, the last time I looked, that becomes her problem. Yeah. And she hasn't really taken much stick for that, curiously, because normally a Home Secretary... Sadiq Khan has rightly taken stick for crime in London. He's the head of the police, as it were, essentially the crime commissioner of the capital. But she's sort of got off slightly lightly on that one.
Actually, I think she has. And I think media performers like her, there's a real disconnect between what the Home Secretaries over the last 10 years have said and what actually happens.
I think so.
Theresa May was quite tough, and that's why she got the premiership. But again, Priti Patel and Suella Braverman, as you say, they talk tough, and they haven't delivered. Mind you, they didn't have enough time, did they, to do their jobs?
True enough. Jonny, talking of time, we don't have enough time. We've hit the clock. It's that quick.
OK. That's it.
I'll see you in another 25 years.
Look forward to it.
Jonny Gould with us here on TalkTV.